What if the person you decided to bully was the one person you absolutely shouldn't have? On a packed flight from Los Angeles to Chicago, a successful executive named Carol Baxter noticed a young black woman casually filming out the window. Assuming the worst, Carol launched a vicious, racially charged tirade determined to put the disrespectful youth in her place. She publicly shamed her, called the flight attendant, and demanded action. But Carol had made a catastrophic mistake. The quiet young woman in the hoodie wasn't a troublemaker. She was a federal investigator, and Carol had just made herself the star of a federal case. The air in the terminal at Los Angeles International Airport hummed with a familiar, organized chaos. It was a symphony of rolling luggage, muffled announcements, and the low chatter of 1,000 different journeys, beginning or ending. To Maya Jones, it was just another day at the office. Dressed in a simple grey hoodie, worn-out jeans, and a pair of unassuming black sneakers, she looked like any other college student, heading home or on a budget vacation. A pair of large, noise-cancelling headphones hung around her neck, and a simple black backpack was slung over one shoulder. She was the picture of anonymity, a face designed to be forgotten the moment you looked away. And that was entirely the point. At 26, Maya was an investigator for the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General. Her youthful appearance, which had once been a source of frustration in her early career, had become her greatest asset. No one looked twice at a young woman scrolling on her phone. No one suspected the student in the corner was meticulously documenting every detail, from the efficiency of the security lines to the pre-flight checks of the ground crew. Her current assignment was a sensitive one, focused on a major carrier, Phoenix Air, which had a growing number of whistleblower complaints regarding cut corners on maintenance checks and overworked crews. Maya's job was to be the unseen eyes and ears gathering unbiased evidence from the inside. She found her gate and settled into a seat, pulling out her phone. It wasn't just a phone. It was a highly encrypted evidence-gathering tool. She began a new log entry, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced speed. LAX Gate 72B, Flight 1128 to ORD, boarding scheduled to begin 14:40, currently 14:25. Ground crew appears to be following standard baggage loading protocols. No immediate anomalies. It was then that she first heard the voice, a sharp, imperious sound that cut through the terminal's hum like a scalpel. "For goodness sake, Mark, can you not walk so fast? You're going to make me spill my latte." It was $22. They practically charge for the air in this place. Maya glanced up. A woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than Maya's rent, was gesturing impatiently at a harried-looking man trailing behind her. The woman, who had a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a face tight with annoyance, was Carol Baxter. Her husband, Mark, a man who seemed to have permanently shrunk to avoid taking up too much space, hurried to her side, murmuring apologies. Carol's eyes scanned the crowded waiting area with disdain, as if searching for a throne and finding only folding chairs. "I cannot believe we're not in the priority lounge. Your status should have been upgraded by now. What's the point of flying business a dozen times a year if they treat you like this?" Mark just nodded, his expression placid. "The flight was overbooked, dear. We were lucky to get these seats. Luck has nothing to do with it." Carol snapped, her voice low, but carrying. "It's about competence, and the staff here has none." Maya subtly angled her phone, taking a quick, discreet photo of a piece of damaged ground equipment near the jet bridge before turning her attention back to her screen. She made a mental note of the couple. Difficult passengers were common, But this woman radiated a special kind of abrasive entitlement. It was a frequency Maya was trained to recognize, as it often coincided with a willingness to ignore rules and cause disruptions. When their boarding group was called, Carol pushed to the front of the line, holding her ticket out like a royal decree. She shot a withering glare at a family fumbling with their strollers, and then her eyes fell on Maya, who was waiting patiently in her assigned zone. Carol's gaze flickered over Maya's simple clothes, her worn backpack, her relaxed posture. A faint sneer touched her lips. It was a look Maya knew well, a swift, dismissive judgment based on a dozen unfounded assumptions. Maya met her gaze for a brief second, her expression neutral, before looking back down at her phone. On the plane, Maya found her window seat 14A. She stowed her small backpack under the seat in front of her, keeping it within easy reach. Her mission required her to be ready to document anything at a moment's notice. As she settled in, she heard that voice again. "Well, this is just wonderful," Carol Baxter said loudly. She and her husband had been assigned seats 14B and 14C, directly next to Maya. A middle seat. Mark, I specifically told you to ensure I had an aisle. I tried. Carol. Mark whispered, avoiding the eyes of the other passengers filing past. It was the last pair of seats together. Carol huffed, stuffing her designer handbag under the seat with unnecessary force. She squeezed past her husband and plopped into the seat next to Maya, her expensive perfume instantly invading Maya's personal space. She didn't offer an "excuse me" or even a simple acknowledgement. She simply acted as if Maya wasn't there. Maya put her headphones on, not playing any music, but using them to dull the ambient noise and enhance her ability to focus on her surroundings. She could feel Carol's radiating irritation like heat from a furnace. The woman fidgeted, sighed dramatically, and typed furiously on her phone, her manicured nails making loud, sharp clicks against the screen. The storm was gathering. Maya just didn't know yet that she was destined to be its epicenter. The plane finished boarding, the cabin doors were secured, and the monotonous safety demonstration began. Maya's work was about to start in earnest. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the flight attendants began their final checks. This was a critical observation window for Maya. She was tasked with noting whether the crew checked that all overhead bins were properly closed. Seats were in the upright position, and window shades were open for takeoff. These weren't just trivial rules. They were essential safety protocols that could save lives during an emergency. A pattern of non-compliance could indicate systemic issues within the airline's training and oversight. Maya discreetly raised her phone, angling it towards the aisle and the ceiling. The device's case was nondescript, and she held it in a way that suggested she was simply reading an article or checking emails. She wasn't filming faces. Her focus was on process on the physical environment of the cabin. She recorded a short clip of the flight attendant at the front of her section, noting that he seemed rushed, skipping a full visual confirmation on 2 rows. She then panned down, documenting the state of the emergency exit row signage near her feet. Every second of footage was time-stamped and geotagged irrefutable data for her report. From the middle seat, Carol Baxter's sharp eyes noticed the movement. She stopped her aggressive texting and slowly turned her head. Her gaze narrowed on Maya's phone. For a moment, she just stared, a fresh wave of indignation building within her. Who did this girl think she was? "Excuse me." Carol's voice sliced through Maya's concentration. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Maya lowered her phone slightly and turned, offering a polite but neutral expression. "Yes. What do you think you're doing with that phone?" Carol asked, her tone dripping with condescension. She gestured at the device as if it were a biohazard. "I'm sorry," Maya feigned slight confusion. Playing dumb was often the fastest way to de-escalate. "Don't play dumb with me, young lady." Carol sneered. "You are filming. On an airplane. I saw you. You were pointing that thing all over the cabin." Maya kept her voice low and calm. "Ma'am, I was just recording the view out the window. And a bit of the takeoff. It's for my personal collection." It was a plausible lie, one she'd used before. But Carol wasn't buying it. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss that was somehow louder than a shout. "Don't you lie to me. I saw you pointing it at the flight attendant. That is a federal offense, you know. You cannot film airline personnel. It's a violation of their privacy and a massive security risk." Carol was partially right. Filming airline personnel in a way that interfered with their duties could be a problem. But she was also wildly misinterpreting the situation, and the law fueled by her own self-importance and inherent biases. She saw a young black woman with a phone and immediately leaped to the worst possible conclusion. "I assure you I'm not interfering with anyone," Maya said, her voice remaining steady. "The phone is in airplane mode, and it's permitted by the airline's policy. I don't care what the policy is." Carol's voice began to rise, drawing the attention of the passengers in the rows nearby. Her husband, Mark, sank lower in his seat, wishing he could become invisible. "I do not consent to be filmed. You are invading my privacy. Put that phone away, now!" Maya could feel the situation escalating. This was precisely what she was trained to avoid. A public scene would compromise her anonymity and could derail her entire investigation. She needed to shut this down quickly and quietly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I am not filming you. My phone is pointed away from you," Maya stated, holding the phone flat in her lap, screen off. "There's no need for this." Carol saw this not as an attempt at peace, but as a sign of weakness. She pressed her advantage. "Oh, I think there is a need. People like you think the rules don't apply. You waltz through life with your headphones on, no respect for anyone around you. Well, you've picked the wrong person to mess with today. The thinly veiled racism in people like you hung in the air, thick and suffocating." Maya's professional calm hardened into a cold internal resolve. This was no longer just about a difficult passenger. This was a targeted harassment. Seeing that her verbal assault was having the desired effect of making Maya fall silent, Carol looked around for an audience. She spotted the flight attendant, Ben, moving down the aisle. "Sir, flight attendant," she called out, her voice ringing with manufactured panic. "This woman is illegally recording passengers and crew. She refuses to stop." "I don't feel safe, Ben." A young man with a weary expression hurried over. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" The spark had been lit. The fire was about to rage. With the flight attendant now present, Carol Baxter transformed into the picture of a concerned, victimized passenger. She placed a hand on her chest, her expression a carefully crafted mask of fear and outrage. "Thank goodness you're here," she said to Ben, her voice laden with drama. "This young woman," she gestured dismissively at Maya, "has been filming everyone since we pushed back from the gate. She filmed you during your safety checks. I asked her to stop politely, and she became aggressive and refused. It's a serious security threat." Every word was a calculated lie, an exaggeration designed to paint Maya as the aggressor. Maya remained silent, her face a neutral mask allowing Carol to spin her narrative. Reacting emotionally would only validate Carol's claims in the eyes of the crew member who was already stressed and looking for the path of least resistance. Ben looked from Carol's frantic face to Maya's calm one. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Maya. "Is this true? Were you filming the cabin?" "I was using my phone, yes." Maya replied, her tone level and respectful. "I was not filming any individuals, and I have since put it away, as you can see." She held up her hands to show they were empty. Her phone was now tucked into her backpack. "She's lying," Carol insisted, her voice growing louder. Passengers were now openly turning in their seats to stare. "I saw her. Her phone was pointed right at you. Who knows what she's planning? Why would anyone need to film on an airplane? It's suspicious. I, for one, do not feel safe sharing a row with someone who behaves like this." The accusation hung in the air. By invoking the language of safety and security, Carol was deliberately trying to frame Maya as a threat. It was a manipulative tactic and a dangerous one. Ben was caught in the middle. On one hand, he had an obviously distressed, high-strung passenger. On the other, he had a quiet young woman who seemed perfectly composed. His training told him to de-escalate, and the easiest way to do that was to placate the loudest person in the room. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, his tone shifting from inquisitive to authoritative. "For the comfort and security of all passengers, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your phone stowed for the remainder of the flight. We can't have any recording in the cabin." It was an incorrect application of the policy personal electronic devices were allowed, but Maya wasn't going to argue. Arguing would create a reportable incident, and her name would be all over it. Her cover would be blown. She had already gathered the crucial data from the departure sequence. "Of course," Maya said with a simple nod. "That's not a problem. It's already put away." Carol smirked, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She had won. She had successfully wielded her privilege to put the unruly girl in her place. Ben gave Maya one last warning look before turning to Carol. "Is everything all right now, ma'am?" "For now," Carol said, leaning back in her seat with a sigh of deep satisfaction. "Thank you for taking this seriously." As Ben walked away, Carol couldn't resist a final jab. She leaned towards Maya, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "See, that's what happens when you don't show respect. Maybe you've learned a lesson today." Maya didn't respond. She simply turned her head and looked out the window at the clouds drifting by below. On the outside, she was a statue of tranquility, but on the inside, she was making a detailed mental entry for her report. Passenger Carol Baxter, seat 14B, initiated unprovoked aggressive confrontation, made false accusations regarding security, escalated situation with flight crew, exhibited clear racial bias in language and tone, flight attendant Ben Purser for forward cabin, failed to follow proper de-escalation protocols, appeased aggressor without verifying facts, potential training deficiency. The incident was far from over. Carol had not just inconvenienced a fellow passenger. She had harassed a federal officer and, more importantly, interfered with an official investigation. The consequences for that were far more severe than simply being told to put a phone away. For the next 2 hours, Carol was insufferable. She complained loudly to her husband about the quality of the complimentary pretzels. She critiqued the movie selection in a voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. And she repeatedly made passive-aggressive comments, ensuring they were within Maya's earshot. "At least the rest of this flight will be safe," she remarked to Mark, who just stared grimly at the seat back in front of him. "You just never know who you're sitting next to these days." Maya ignored it all. She closed her eyes, appearing to sleep. But she was wide awake, cataloguing every word, every sigh, every smug glance. Carol Baxter was no longer just a difficult passenger. She was now a person of interest. And as the plane began its descent into Chicago, Maya knew that Carol's day of reckoning was waiting for her right at the gate. The wheels of Phoenix Air Flight 1128 touched down at Chicago O'Hare with a gentle bump. As the plane taxied towards the terminal, the familiar chime sounded, signaling that it was safe to use electronic devices. Passengers began stirring, gathering their belongings, and a collective sense of relief filled the cabin. Carol Baxter, however, was not finished. As Maya reached down to pull her backpack from under the seat, Carol made one last snide comment loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "I hope you learned your lesson about privacy and respecting your elders," she said, not even looking at Maya, but directing the comment into the air like a proclamation. "Some people have to learn things the hard way." Maya didn't rise to the bait. She simply slung her backpack over her shoulder and waited for the line to move. Her heart was beating with a steady professional rhythm. She felt no anger, only a cold, methodical focus. The next phase was about to begin. The plane docked at the gate, and the fasten seatbelt sign switched off. As passengers began to deplane, Carol made a point of pushing ahead of Maya, shooting her a final triumphant glare over her shoulder. "Enjoy your welcome to Chicago," she said with a malicious sweetness. Maya let her go, maintaining a deliberate distance. She followed the slow-moving crowd down the jet bridge and into the terminal. As she stepped into the gate area, she saw exactly what she expected to see. Standing near the gate agent's podium were two uniformed airport police officers and a man in a crisp, dark suit. He had the unmistakable posture of a federal agent, calm, observant, and radiating an aura of no-nonsense authority. Carol saw them too, and her face lit up with a vindictive glee. She was convinced they were there for Maya. She had probably imagined this exact scenario for the entire flight, the defiant girl being hauled away in handcuffs. She marched straight towards the group, her husband Mark trailing nervously behind. "Officers, thank you for being here," Carol announced, pointing a perfectly manicured finger back at Maya, who was just emerging from the jet bridge. "That's her, the one I reported. She was filming on the plane, acting suspiciously. I'm the one who alerted the flight attendant." The man in the suit turned his head slowly, his gaze passing over Carol without interest, before landing on Maya. His expression remained unreadable. The airport police officers shifted their weight, their faces impassive. Ignoring Carol completely, the man in the suit took a step forward, addressing Maya directly. His voice was calm and professional. Investigator Jones Maya met his gaze and gave a slight nod. "Agent Miller, we received your preliminary report via encrypted text an hour ago." Agent Miller said, his voice low but clear. "Is there an ongoing issue?" Maya unzipped a small hidden pocket in her backpack and produced a slim leather wallet. She flipped it open, revealing the golden badge and credentials of the Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General. Agent Miller. There was a minor incident on the flight that constitutes interference, she said, her voice now devoid of the youthful uncertainty she had projected earlier. It was crisp, clear, and authoritative. This passenger, she gestured calmly towards the stunned Ms. Carol Baxter, caused a significant public disturbance, made false and inflammatory accusations, and directly hindered my ability to conduct my official duties. The air in the gate area seemed to crackle. Carol Baxter's face, which had been flushed with smug triumph, went completely pale. The color drained away so fast, she looked like a statue. Her jaw hung slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Her husband Mark looked as if he might actually collapse. Other passengers who had witnessed the onboard confrontation were now lingering their phones, suddenly out, as they realized they were witnessing something far more dramatic than they had imagined. The whispers started immediately. "Wait, she's the investigator. Oh my God, that lady was harassing a federal agent." Carol stammered, her voice a weak, cracking version of its former self. "Investigator? What are you talking about?" It was just a misunderstanding. Agent Miller of the FAA finally turned his full attention to Carol. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Ma'am, my name is Agent Robert Miller, with the Federal Aviation Administration. Investigator Jones is a federal officer on official assignment. We take any interference with her duties extremely seriously. You and your husband will need to come with us." The two airport police officers stepped forward, their expressions firm but professional. One stood by Carol, the other by Mark. There were no handcuffs, but the implication was clear. They were not free to go. Carol's world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of wealth, privilege, and entitlement, had just been demolished by a quiet young woman in a hoodie. The lesson she had been so keen to teach had just boomeranged back with the force of a freight train. And it was just beginning. The room was small, windowless, and painted a soul-crushing shade of institutional beige. Located in a restricted area of O'Hare's security operations, it contained nothing more than a metal table and a few uncomfortable plastic chairs. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and anxiety. For Carol and Mark Baxter, it felt like the end of the world. Carol's arrogant demeanor had completely evaporated, replaced by a frantic, pleading terror. The cream-colored pantsuit now seemed less a symbol of power and more like a costume she could no longer hide behind. Mark sat beside her, put and silent, staring at his hands clasped on the table. Across from them sat Maya Jones and Agent Miller. The transformation in Maya was startling. She had shed the persona of the unassuming student entirely. She sat upright, her posture exuding confidence and authority. Her eyes, once carefully neutral, were now sharp and analytical. The file she had opened on the table was thick. "Let's be very clear about what's happening here, Agent Miller," began his voice, leaving no room for argument. "Investigator Jones is conducting an official inquiry into Phoenix Air on behalf of the Department of Transportation. Her work is a matter of national public safety. When you confronted her, you weren't just arguing with a fellow passenger. You were actively obstructing a federal investigation. It was a mistake, a complete misunderstanding." Carol insisted, her voice trembling. "I was concerned about my privacy, about everyone's safety. I thought she was... I don't know what I thought. I would never ever interfere with a government official." Maya looked down at her notes, then met Carol's eyes. Her voice was cold and precise. "At 15:12 Central Time, you approached me and accused me of committing a federal offense. At 15:14, you stated, and I quote, 'People like you think the rules don't apply.' At 15:17, you falsely reported to the flight attendant that I had become aggressive and that you did not feel safe. A statement clearly intended to frame me as a threat. You repeatedly used inflammatory and biased language." Which part of that was a misunderstanding? "Ms. Baxter." Carol flinched as if struck, hearing her own words recited back to her in this sterile, unforgiving environment, stripped them of their power and revealed their ugly core. I was upset. I didn't mean it like that. I'm not..." I'm not a racist person. Your intent is irrelevant, Agent Miller cut in, sharply. Your actions are what matter. Your verbal assault and false report forced Investigator Jones to cease her evidence collection and created a hostile environment that could have compromised her entire operation. Furthermore, your actions forced the flight crew to divert their attention from their pre-flight safety duties. Agent Miller gestured to one of the uniformed officers who entered the room with a tablet. We have already pulled the statement from the flight attendant, Ben Carter. He corroborates Investigator Jones's account of your unprovoked aggression. We have also taken preliminary statements from 3 other passengers who were seated nearby. Their accounts align perfectly with the investigators. He swiped on the tablet. And then there's this. He turned the screen to face them. It showed a grainy but clear video obviously filmed on a passenger's phone. It captured the moment Agent Miller had greeted Maya at the gate and Carol's shocked, horrified reaction. The video had already been uploaded to social media and was rapidly gaining views. Carol stared at her own crumbling face on the screen. "No," she whispered. The charge Agent Miller continued, his voice relentless. Is Title 18, Section 111 of the U.S. Code assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers or employees? While you did not physically assault Investigator Jones, your actions fall under the definition of impeding and interfering. It is a federal felony. Mark Baxter finally spoke, his voice hoarse. A felony. For an argument. This is insane. This was not an argument, Mr. Baxter. Maya corrected him calmly. This was a calculated harassment campaign against someone your wife profiled as an easy target. And you, sir, stood by and did nothing to de-escalate the situation your wife created. Your complicity has been noted. Mark shrank back as if he'd been burned. The door opened again, and a lawyer from the airline, a grim-faced woman, entered the room. She didn't even look at the Baxters. She spoke directly to Agent Miller. Agent, on behalf of Phoenix Air, please accept our sincerest apologies for the conduct of our passengers and any failure of our crew to properly manage the situation. We will cooperate fully with your investigation. As for Mr. and Mrs. Baxter, their return tickets have been cancelled. They are, as of this moment, banned for life from flying on Phoenix Air or any of our partner airlines. The finality of the statement hit Carol like a physical blow. Banned for life. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was a permanent black mark. "You can't do this," she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "My job. I have to travel for my job." Agent Miller looked at her without a trace of sympathy. "Perhaps you should have considered that before you decided to accost a federal officer, Ms. Baxter. You are being officially detained. You have the right to an attorney. I suggest you use it." The sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor of the O'Hare security office felt like a portal to another dimension. When Carol and Mark Baxter stepped back into the main terminal, blinking in the chaotic bustle of travelers, the world looked the same, but they were fundamentally different. They were no longer privileged passengers on a business trip. They were federal detainees, released on their own recognizance pending a court date, their passports temporarily confiscated. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on Carol's shoulders, stealing the air from her lungs. They wordlessly collected their checked luggage and took a taxi to the nearest soulless airport hotel. Inside their room, the silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Carol sank onto the edge of the stiff bed, her expensive pantsuit now feeling like a costume for a play that had ended in disaster. Mark stood by the window, staring out at the endless stream of cars on the freeway below his back, a rigid wall of unspoken recrimination. The first tremor of the impending avalanche came from Mark's phone. It buzzed on the nightstand, a sharp, insistent sound. He picked it up, his thumb hovering over the screen. A news alert. He read it, and Carol watched as what little color remained in his face drained away. "Oh, God." "Carol," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He turned the phone towards her. The headline from a major Chicago news outlet was stark and brutal. "Executive detained at O'Hare after on-board confrontation with undercover federal agent." Below it was a still image, a grainy screenshot from the viral video that was already spreading like wildfire. It was a perfect, terrible picture, Carol, her face a mask of shocked horror, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusatorily, while Maya Jones stood calmly in the background, her federal badge gleaming in the harsh terminal light. Carol snatched the phone. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. The story was everywhere. The passenger who filmed the gate encounter had uploaded it with the caption, "Karen picked the wrong one today. LOL, Hansworth federal agent. Karma." From there, it had mutated and multiplied. The hashtag, airline. Karen was trending. People had already identified her. Her name, her photograph, and her title. Senior Vice President at Innovate Strategies were plastered across Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit. The comments were a torrent of digital vitriol. "Hope she enjoys the federal no-fly list. This is what happens when privilege gets a reality check. That agent's face is epic. The calm before the storm." There were memes, too. Her horrified face was photoshopped onto movie posters and historical paintings. She wasn't a person anymore. She was a public spectacle, an effigy to be burned in the town square of the internet. Her own phone, which she had switched on with a sense of dread, began to buzz uncontrollably. A flood of notifications linked in corporate email texts from friends and colleagues. She couldn't look. She dropped the phone on the bed as if it were on fire. The call that mattered came 20 minutes later. The caller ID read, "David Chen, the CEO of Innovate Strategies." With a shaking hand, she answered. Carol David's voice was clipped, devoid of its usual warmth. There was no, "How are you?" No pleasantries. "I'm assuming you've seen the news. David, it's a complete misunderstanding. It's been blown completely out of proportion. I can explain everything," she began, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "There's nothing to explain." He cut her off, his tone like ice. "I've just been on a call with our board and our legal team. We've seen the video. We've read the initial reports. Our PR department is fielding calls from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. Do you have any idea the damage this has done to our brand in the last hour?" "I can fix this," she pleaded. "I'll issue a statement." "You will do nothing," he commanded. "Effective immediately, you are on indefinite unpaid leave. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. An internal investigation has been launched, but frankly, Carol, it's a formality. You are to have no contact with any of our clients or employees. A courier will be at your house tomorrow to collect your company laptop and phone. Am I clear?" The finality in his voice was absolute. She wasn't just his employee. She had been his colleague for 12 years. They had celebrated deals, attended company retreats, had dinner with their spouses. Now he was excising her from the company like a tumor. "David, please." "It's done, Carol," he said. and the line went dead. She stared at the phone, the silence ringing in her ears. Then a sob escaped her, a ragged, ugly sound. She had lost her career. In a single phone call, her professional life had been executed. Mark finally turned from the window. The weary resignation on his face had been replaced by a slow-burning anger, an anger she realized had been simmering for years. "Are you happy now?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "What? How can you say that?" she cried. "My life is over. Our life is over, Carol. And yes, I'm asking if you're happy. You got what you wanted. You got to put someone in her place. Was it worth it? It wasn't like that. She was disrespectful, and she was a young woman looking out a window." He finally exploded, his voice echoing in the small room. "But you couldn't stand it, could you? You saw a young, confident black woman, and your brain just short-circuited. You had to assert your dominance. You had to be the one in charge. It's the same thing you do to waiters who are too slow, to cashiers who don't smile enough to my own brother at Christmas dinner. I have spent 2 decades trailing behind you, cleaning up your social messes and murmuring apologies. I enabled this. I let you get away with it. And now it's blown up in our faces on a national stage." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, piercing the bubble of self-pity she had wrapped around herself. He was right. She saw a flash of all the other times, the sneers, the complaints, the imperious demands. She had always seen it as maintaining standards. She saw now it was just a pattern of casual cruelty. The social death was swift. The next morning, a text came from the chair of the charity board she sat on. It was a curt, formal message informing her that in light of recent events, her resignation would be expected and gratefully accepted. Friends who had texted her frantic "OMG, is this you?" messages the night before went silent after she confirmed it was. She was radioactive, and no one wanted to be caught in the fallout. The most crushing blow came when they finally met with their lawyer. Franklin Croft laid out the grim reality not just of the criminal charges, but of the financial ruin. His retainer alone was $50,000. The total cost to fight a federal charge, even to a plea bargain, would likely run into the hundreds of thousands. "We'll have to sell the stocks," Mark said, looking at a financial statement with dead eyes. "Maybe the bonds, too." "That's our retirement," Carol whispered, horrified. "We don't have a retirement anymore, Carol," he said, his voice flat. "We have a legal defense fund. And after that, who knows?" The final formal severance came a week later via a cold, legalese-filled letter from Innovate Strategies' HR department. Her employment was terminated for cause, citing a violation of the company's code of conduct and actions that resulted in irreparable reputational harm. Her severance, her stock options, her bonus all void. The intricate, prosperous life she had built with such meticulous care had been completely and utterly demolished. And as she sat on the floor of a hotel room, surrounded by the wreckage, she knew with a terrifying certainty that she had no one to blame but herself. The karma cascade had washed everything away. The months that followed the incident on Flight 1128 were not a swift fall from grace for Carol Baxter, but a slow, grinding descent into a life she no longer recognized. The solid ground of her privilege and status had liquefied beneath her feet, and she was sinking into a quicksand of legal fees, public shame, and personal ruin. Her first meeting with Franklin Croft, a federal defense attorney with a corner office in a downtown Chicago skyscraper and a reputation for being brutally effective, was a jarring reality check. Croft was a man in his 60s with tired eyes, that had seen every kind of human folly. He listened without expression as Carol, seated in a plush leather chair that cost more than Maya Jones's entire wardrobe, spun her tale. She painted herself as the victim, a concerned citizen, a vigilant passenger who was misunderstood and railroaded by an overzealous government agent. When she finished, Croft leaned back and steepled his fingers. "Let me be clear, Mrs. Baxter," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "You are not the victim here. You are the protagonist of a story that ends with you in a federal courtroom. From a legal standpoint, your feelings are irrelevant. Your actions are all that matter." He proceeded to dismantle her narrative piece by piece. "We have the sworn statement of the flight attendant Ben Carter, who describes you as belligerent and accusatory. We have voluntary statements from 3 other passengers in your immediate vicinity. A Mr. Henderson in 15A says you were, quote, on a power trip from the moment you sat down. A Ms. Albright in 13B states she heard you use the phrase, people like you, in a tone she perceived as racially derogatory. Then we have the video, the viral video. A jury will see that video, Mrs. Baxter. They will see your smug satisfaction turn to sheer panic. They will see you point your finger at Investigator Jones, and then they will see her badge. But I didn't touch her." Carol protested, her voice rising. "How is that assault?" "The charge is not assault," Croft corrected her flatly. "It's Title 18, Section 111. Impeding. You forced a federal officer during the commission of her duties to cease her work. You created a public disturbance that required her to break cover and identify herself to law enforcement. You interfered. In the eyes of the U.S. Attorney's Office, you might as well have put your hands on her. They want to make an example of you to send a message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated." The pre-trial deposition was Carol's personal Rubicon. She walked into the sterile conference room expecting to face the girl in the hoodie. Instead, she was confronted by Investigator Maya Jones, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a professional bun. She looked older, formidable. She radiated an unnerving calm. Mark sat beside Carol, looking ill, but his presence was mandated. Maya's testimony was the stuff of nightmares for a defense attorney. She didn't embellish or editorialize. She simply recited the facts from her official report, her voice a steady, unemotional cadence. She recounted the timeline to the second, quoted Carol's words verbatim, and described the potential compromises to her investigation with chilling, bureaucratic precision. "Ms. Baxter's actions," Maya stated, looking directly at the court reporter, "forced me to prematurely terminate my surveillance of the cabin crew's pre-flight safety compliance checks. Her loud and false accusations drew unwanted attention, potentially compromising my anonymity for any future operations on this carrier." When Croft attempted a mild cross-examination, trying to paint Carol's actions as those of an overly anxious flyer, Maya was unshakable. "Were you concerned for your safety?" Investigator Jones Croft asked. "No," Maya replied without hesitation. "I was concerned for the integrity of my investigation. It was a masterclass in professional testimony." Carol felt herself shrink in her chair. This wasn't the disrespectful youth she had sought to discipline. This was a formidable agent of the state, and Carol had made herself the target of its full, dispassionate attention. After the deposition, Croft told her plainly, "We take the plea bargain. A trial would be a slaughter." The sentencing hearing was a brief, humiliating affair. The courtroom was dotted with a few local news reporters, their presence a testament to the lingering public interest in the airline Karen story. Dressed in a somber grey suit, Carol stood before the judge and read a prepared statement, her voice cracking. It was a hollow apology filled with words of regret that tasted like ash in her mouth. The judge, a stern woman named Alice Murdoch, was unimpressed. "Miss Baxter," she said, peering down from the bench, "your actions on that flight were not born of concern for safety. They were born of arrogance. You chose to wield your social position as a weapon against a person you wrongly presumed had none. That you did so against a federal officer makes it a matter for this court. That you did so with what appears to be significant racial animus makes it a matter of public shame." The sentence landed like a series of hammer blows. 2 years of probation, a $10,000 fine, and the two conditions that made her stomach clench: 200 hours of community service and mandatory court-supervised courses in both anger management and racial sensitivity. The fine was a nuisance, but the legal fees were catastrophic. Croft's services cost well over $100,000. They exhausted their liquid savings, then liquidated a stock portfolio meant for retirement. Finally, they had to take out a second mortgage on their sprawling suburban home. The financial security Carol had always taken for granted was gone. Her community service was spent cleaning bathrooms and picking up trash in a city park on the west side of Chicago, an area she would have previously only driven through with her doors locked. Dressed in a fluorescent orange vest, she was stripped of her name and identity. She was just another offender, sweating under the summer sun, scraping gum off a park bench. Her supervisor, a man named Hector, treated her with the same gruff indifference he showed everyone else. Her initial attempts to manage her tasks like a corporate project were met with a simple, "just pick up the trash, lady." It was there, amidst the dirt and the public anonymity, that the first cracks in her armor of self-pity began to appear. She saw people whose struggles were real, immediate, and raw, not the self-inflicted wounds of a ruined reputation. The fabric of her marriage, already worn thin by years of her abrasive personality, tore completely. The fight wasn't one explosive event, but a slow, agonizing unraveling. "Did you ever love me, Mark?" she asked one night, sitting in the near-empty living room, surrounded by packing boxes. "Or was I just a part of the life you thought you were supposed to have?" Mark looked at her, his face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have aged him a decade. "I did, Carol. But the woman I loved wasn't this angry. I spent 20 years walking on eggshells trying to manage your moods, apologizing for your behavior to waiters and store clerks and my own family. I was your husband, but my real job was being your damage control specialist. And after this, I'm just tired. I have no more apologies left to give." He filed for divorce a week later. The beautiful house, the symbol of all her achievements, was sold to cover the mountain of debt. Mark moved into a small apartment downtown. Carol, once the senior vice president of Innovate Strategies, found herself in a one-bedroom rental in a faceless suburban complex, surrounded by the few pieces of furniture she had been allotted in the settlement. The mandatory classes were her final crucible. In anger management, she was surrounded by people whose rage was a roaring fire. Men who had gotten into bar fights, women who had screamed at their children. Carol, with her cold, simmering resentment, felt superior at first. She tried to intellectualize her feelings, talking about external stresses and mismanaged expectations. The therapist, a patient woman named Sarah, let her talk for 2 sessions before gently cutting her off. Carol, she said, the issue wasn't that the young woman on the plane was filming. The issue was that you believed you had the right to tell her what to do. Your anger doesn't come from stress. It comes from a loss of control. Let's talk about that. The racial sensitivity training was even more brutal. She walked in armed with denials. "I'm not a racist. I have black friends. My company had a diversity program." The instructor, a black man named Dr. Evans, listened calmly. He didn't argue. Instead, he led the group through exercises on implicit bias and systemic privilege. He made them analyze scenarios, dissect language. One day he put the words, "people like you," on the whiteboard. "Let's break this down," he said. What does this phrase accomplish? It creates an us and a them. It generalizes, it dehumanizes, it's a tool of exclusion. Carol sat in stunned silence as the group discussed all the ugly implications of those 3 simple words, her words. She was forced to confront the memory, to see it not from her own eyes, but from Maya's. She saw herself, her face twisted with condescension, her voice sharp with unearned authority. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something beyond her own suffering. She felt shame. It was a small, unfamiliar feeling, but it was there. It wasn't a magical epiphany that cured her, but it was a beginning, the painful, humbling start of self-awareness. Maya Jones never followed the specifics of Carol's life. She saw a headline once about the sentencing while scrolling through the news on her laptop in a hotel room in Seattle where she was investigating a shipping company. She felt no satisfaction, no thrill of victory. Carol Baxter was no longer a person to her. She was a closed case file, a data point in a report. The real victory was the email she had received from her director a month prior. Her investigation into Phoenix Air had triggered a full-scale FAA audit. The airline was hit with a record-breaking $14 million fine for safety violations and forced to implement a sweeping new set of training and maintenance protocols. Her work, the work Carol had tried to stop, would likely save lives. That was what mattered. The story of Carol Baxter became a cautionary tale that lingered in the background of Maya's life, a stark reminder of the volatile world she operated in. It was proof that the most dangerous threats didn't always come from criminals or terrorists, but sometimes from the quiet, corrosive prejudices of ordinary people. It was a lesson in the immense power of perception and the catastrophic price of seeing people not for who they are, but for who you assume them to be. In the end, Carol Baxter had been desperate to teach a young woman a lesson, and in the most devastating way imaginable she had. The lesson was for herself, and the tuition had cost her everything. The story of Carol Baxter is a chilling and powerful reminder that the person sitting next to you might not be who you think they are. A single moment of unchecked arrogance, fueled by deep-seated prejudice, caused an executive's meticulously constructed life to implode. She thought she was disciplining a disrespectful young woman, but she was actually obstructing a federal investigator and writing the final chapter of her own career. This shocking turn of events shows that karma can be delivered at 30,000 feet, and that the consequences for our actions can be far greater than we could ever imagine. If you were captivated by this incredible story of hubris and consequence, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good karma story, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we uncover.